Yep.
Okay. All right. So we'll see if this goes. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Barbara Campbell, and I am the Executive Director of the Dalton Foundation and get to lead and support the relink.org project. And we are really thrilled to have leaders from Thrive for Change here with us today, Bethany Roebuck and Ashley Rosser. While everyone's still joining in, I was gonna show a couple of our relink.org slides real quick to just share a little bit about relink.org for those of you that don't know. And of course, it's not advancing, without saying. Y'all are seeing my, oh, there we go. Does my slide advance? All right, thank you. I got a new 2-screen setup here, and ooh, that's not gonna go good for me. All right, so for those of you that don't know, relink.org is a free online database for all 88 counties in Ohio, where we have resources. Our passion is just to connect. I think all of y'all are out there, the Thrive for Changes, all of y'all that are joining in are out there on the front lines doing really hard work. And it's our desire to connect people in need with the services you do. And we do it digitally through the relink.org platform, where you can see a little picture of it there. And then we do it also through educational events like this one. Like I said, we view ourselves as just the connector and supporting and highlighting the work that y'all do around all of these different topics that are important throughout our state. This slide here just shows some of these services that we do offer. We have addiction recovery services, anti-human trafficking services. We added family services back in 2022. Basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, furniture. We have a lot of reentry resources. We are very thrilled to partner with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections for working on the tablets of all the inmates in Ohio. That's been a huge project. And then we also have behavioral health information as well. We've designed relink.org to be really easy to use. Like it says, 3 clicks, 3 seconds, at least 3 options. And we really have people test us to that. So we do have over 13,000 going on 14,000 resources in the database and used by thousands of Ohioans every single week. So we hope it's easy. You can search by zip code, county, city, and the data is redundant, so you can find it in very different ways. And then lastly, relink.org is designed for providers too of services, where you can register your own organization, you can update your own data, which is extremely beneficial for you. We are now tracking how many times an organization has been searched. And it is incredible the amount of times organizations have been searched. I think our #1 organization is out of Columbus, and it's been searched over 30,000 times since January 1st. So it's incredible the amount of times your organization comes up when you are searched. So it's important, and we encourage everyone to register their organization so you can update your data. And then I just wanted to mention our next webinar, a save the date for April 19th at 2 o'clock. We will be pleased to have Tyler Menick joining us from Recovery Friendly Hamilton County. And this webinar will really focus on jobs, and it's going to focus on both companies and helping individuals in recovery find meaningful, long-term, sustainable employment, because we know how important that is for a successful recovery. So we're excited about that. And that's all I have to say. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, because I think we've now had everyone plenty of time to come in. So I will formally introduce, we've got Bethany Roebuck with us with Thrive for Change. She's their executive director. And we have Ashley Rosser here, who will be doing the training today. She is their harm reduction specialist. So without further ado, Ashley, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the friendly introduction. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you all could be here. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen for the people on video. Thank you. Okay, perfect. My name is Ashley, she, her pronouns. So we're going to be talking a lot about harm reduction and different aspects within harm reduction. This is like our introduction to understanding harm reduction. And although there are many layers, it gets pretty deep. This is like the basic understanding of such. My story and lived experience is that I'm in recovery myself. I have a pretty deep background using drugs. I've been in recovery for about 6 years. I have a lot of experience in and out of different types of systems like jail and probation, drug courts, different types of women's recovery homes, intensive outpatient programs. So with my experience being in and out a lot of these systems, it's like I'm able to look back and reflect on that experience and kind of identify where there might be gaps, where it could be better. And I spend a lot of my time now educating on harm reduction like we're doing today, because I want to be able to give back to the community something that I didn't get. And that's anything involving harm reduction. I didn't have any knowledge of syringe exchanges or naloxone. I didn't know what to do if someone overdosed. So there was a lot of harm in my life that came from that came from not having access to harm reduction or medical care, even pathways to recovery. So I like to use my experience, and you'll hear me talk about other things in my experience throughout this presentation that are relevant to providing some context and a little bit of background. So today, now that I'm in recovery, like I said, I like to be able to give back and do things for other people in the community, and of course, spread education so nobody has to go through unnecessary harm. Some general housekeeping stuff. Normally when we do these presentations, you can private message my co-host, Bethany Roebuck, who will be moderating the chat. So if there's something that you wanted to share or talk about, I don't believe you'll have the opportunity to go off mute because of the format this meeting is in, but you're still able to share like you're doing in the chat or directly messaging Bethany if you want to remain anonymous. That's totally okay. You want to be anonymous, but also share, private message Bethany, and she'll be able to read out loud your comment and keep your privacy as well. If you're able to edit your pronouns into the name, into your name, that will help us better address you and make sure that we're also being respectful of your pronouns and how you identify. And the chat will be monitored pretty closely, like I said. And I want to also give like a little disclaimer. A lot of harm reduction stuff can be new for a lot of us. And we're going to be going over a lot of different layers of harm reduction. So as you're going through this, just be gentle and kind to yourselves. Be open to learning new information. I remember there was a time when I thought that I had, learned everything. I thought I've been through everything that there was to go through. And then I discovered underground harm reduction programs and Narcan distribution efforts, and it opened me up to a whole new world. So it's like the more I'm involved, the more I learn, the more I find out, the more things I'm exposed to. So definitely be gentle with yourselves and be open to receiving new information, because there's always something else out there to learn. And before we get started on the details, I wanted to launch a poll to get to know people a little better and kind of find out the background of why everyone's here. So if Barb, you're able to share the first poll marked as poll number 1. Just a really brief question. And it's have you ever taken Narcan training before? Have you ever had Naloxone training? And we'll give it a minute for you guys to take it.
You guys let me know when you want me to end it.
That should be good.
Okay.
Are you able to share the poll? Is that an option on this?
Yeah, I can share the results
Okay.
right now. Would you let me do that?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Oh, that's wonderful. this is exciting. It's a pretty good split between people who have had training and not had training, but also some folks that would like a refresher. This is awesome. Thank you for taking the poll, everybody. We got a couple more polls coming up too, but I'll let you guys know when those arrive. So today for our agenda, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what we do at our organization, Thrive for Change, giving an overview of the current overdose crisis and providing a little bit of context and background to understanding how we got into the situation that we're in today, understanding harm reduction, the principles and the practices. We'll go through what harm reduction services can look like, and then we'll talk about understanding the different layers of stigma and person first language. We'll go over like what that looks like, and what we can do to reduce potential harms that come from stigmatizing language. And we'll definitely be talking about Narcan, responding to an overdose, recognizing an overdose. And then we'll go over some kind of resources for Ohio. So at Thrive for Change, we started we were part of another organization before this. We started in the pandemic doing community outreach when a lot of services were being shut down and hours were being restricted. We've seen overdose numbers going up. So that pretty much prompted us to make the push to try something that we haven't done before, which is literally going outside and handing out Narcan, connecting people to different types of resources. So instead of, just accepting that, all these businesses were shut down and a lot of people lost access to their care, we wanted to do something different. We wanted to let people know that we were still operating and existing, that there are still ways to get connected to the resources that you need. And it turned into what we're doing today, which is a full statewide Narcan mail order program. So people can get Narcan sent to them anywhere in the state of Ohio for free. That also comes with training as well. And we also can sign people up to become Narcan distributors themselves. So if you have Narcan already, but you want to distribute it, that's definitely something we can do. We'll take you through a training course and give you all the Narcan supply you need to be successful in distributing Narcan in your community. We do a lot of pop-up outreach on the street as well. We collaborate with a lot of other organizations to do this because it takes a village for us to be able to do what we need to do. So we'll get our tables and our canopy tent. We'll set up in an area that is high traffic. So we're either in a parking lot or on the sidewalk. We got our signs that say we're handing out free Narcan, and people can literally just pull up, park, and grab some Narcan, get connected to other resources that are provided by our partners. So like if they need peer support or a food pantry or a detox, we have all those options there for them. We do a lot of training and education as well, just like this, what we're doing today. I love doing education, and it's definitely a soft spot for me. It's something that I didn't have when I was actively using drugs. So it's one of my favorite parts of harm reduction, is being able to give knowledge away and share it with other people. We have actually a monthly harm reduction training and Naloxone training. It's every third Monday of the month and every third Tuesday of the month. It's the same training, but it's offered at 2 different times. So one is at 11 a.m. and then another one the next day at 5:30 p.m. for folks that have just different schedules, so they can choose whichever one works best for them. If you wanted to either find those trainings or share them with a friend, they are on our Facebook page, and there's a link to Eventbrite to sign up. So please feel free to share any of those trainings with your friends or family that you think should be learning this information. We do a lot of advocacy and organizing as well. A lot of harm reduction has to do with identifying gaps in care and figuring out what we need to do to take steps to close those gaps. And like I said earlier, we have a lot of community partners. That's a big part of what we do, is networking, using our partnerships to better serve the community, because sometimes people need more than just what we have to offer. So having, you know, a plethora of partnerships, we're easily able to refer people to what they need based on what their needs are. So a little bit of background for the current overdose crisis. There is definitely a lot of moving parts here, but I found just a few key points that are pretty important. Right now, especially like in Ohio, I mean, probably a lot of us know about fentanyl, but I wanted to just put it out there because a lot of people don't realize that it's not just fentanyl that exists, it's fentanyl contamination and other drugs as well. So fentanyl is the synthetic opiate. It's stronger than heroin, morphine. It's man-made and it's hard to tell like what the strength or dose is. So when you have fentanyl that's on the street in the black market, it gets mixed into other drugs that it can look like. For example, cocaine and methamphetamine are like white powdery substances, and so is fentanyl. Although fentanyl has a medicinal purpose, like it can be prescribed either like in a pill form or a patch form, there's still a lot of underground makers, like manufacturers of fentanyl, which allows it to flow into our other drugs. So a lot of people are getting, they're thinking that they're getting cocaine, but what they're actually getting is a combination of cocaine and fentanyl. And that's a big part of harm reduction, is giving people tools that they need to make an informed decision, because you can't tell by looking at it if it's fentanyl or not. Like you can't tell the difference. Like, oh, am I looking at like crystal methamphetamine, or is this something else? So people that don't have a tolerance to fentanyl are caught pretty off guard by it. It's different if you had like a slow tolerance build up to it, but people that normally take things like stimulants are not expecting to get a really strong dose of an opiate, which is fentanyl. A lot of fentanyl can also be found in pills like Xanax, ecstasy, Percocets, Vicodin. There are pill press machines. So it's like you take whatever substance you have, push it into the form, like you mold it into the form of an actual pill. So a lot of people think they're getting the real thing, but they're actually getting a pressed pill, which is a lot of fentanyl. So if you're thinking that you're taking something small like a Vicodin, which is a pain reliever, but you're getting fentanyl and you don't have a tolerance to it, it catches people off guard and they're not ready for it. So we're seeing a lot of overdoses from contamination of other drugs and mixing of other drugs in our drug supply here. In I want to say it was 2015, the CDC did a study of the overdose deaths that happened in Ohio. They pointed out 14 different counties in particular, but what they found was 70% of fatal overdoses actually had a bystander present. That could be 70% in some counties, but it was 85% in a few other counties as well. And that's a really high number to have bystanders present to fatal overdoses. It's a pretty grim reality, and it's definitely depressing, but at the same time, there is still hope that we can at least equip these people, these bystanders, with what they need to help prevent fatal overdoses from happening. So like if we can just get Narcan into their hands and teach them about what to do, what it looks like to respond to an overdose, we can ultimately save lives in that way. Okay, so harm reduction. Harm reduction, this is the actual definition, a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing the negative consequences associated with drug use. But there's harm reduction with a capital HR, and then there's harm reduction in lowercase. There's different types of harm reduction. So if you're thinking about reducing harm and ways we reduce harm in our everyday life, it's all around us, but it's not really pointed out in the same way of looking at it like harm reduction. So anytime you get in a car and you put your seatbelt on, that's definitely harm reduction. If you ride a bicycle and you wear a helmet, that's definitely harm reduction too. There's all different types all around us, things that we do to prevent any type of harm to ourselves. And that could be like in the images shown on the screen, wearing condoms, riding a bike, or going kayaking and wearing a life jacket. These are ways that we reduce harm. So when we're talking about harm reduction as it pertains to drug use, it's thinking about what are some of the consequences that we see from drug use and what can we do to intervene so they don't get worse. So we'll go over a lot of different types of services that you'll see within the harm reduction world and what they look like. And also, yeah, feel free to ask questions in the chat, or like, feel free to leave some comments too. Like if you have any good examples of harm reduction might look like in our everyday life, feel free to drop that in the chat. There are 8 principles of harm reduction. These are all by the National Harm Reduction Coalition, which we can give you all the link in the follow-up meeting notes to this. They're an absolutely amazing resource for harm reduction and learning about harm reduction. But they kind of laid out different pillars of harm reduction, right? Accepting for better or worse that just drugs are a part of our world and it's really not possible to make them go away. It's like we have to adapt around that. Drugs have existed for a very long time, since the dawn of humanity, and served a lot of different purposes. And it's like honoring those purposes and realizing that, you know, drug use is here, it's in our world, and we can either adapt and work to reduce potential harms, or we can pretend that it doesn't exist. And we know what that's like when we live in a world that pretends harm reduction doesn't exist. We see a lot of harm. We see a lot of overdose deaths. We see a lot of disease spread, a lot of injuries that could have been prevented otherwise. Harm reduction, it's also about empowering people, especially people that are more vulnerable and marginalized, and empowering them with education and knowledge so that they can make an informed decision and they can decide what they would like to do with their lives, and we can support them along the way. So basically about giving people their power back and understanding that there's a lot of different types of layers in this life and a lot of aspects that make up our own situations in this world. And I would really like to point out also the term intersectionality. It's a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who was looking for a way to describe her experience as a Black woman in this world. If you look her up, you'll see a lot about what led her to figuring this term out and feeling like there's a need for it to exist. She says, she speaks a lot about her experience, and she was trying to explain, like, yeah, so my company that I work for worked really hard to address a lot of the sexism that I was facing as a woman in a corporate workspace, but they weren't really addressing the racism that I was dealing with. So her intersection is that she's a Black woman. So that's a little more layered than just treating everybody the same with a really broad brush, because we all have our own intersections of marginalization or privilege that it can either help us or it can make it harder for us to get our needs met. And of course, something really important in this too, like when we're talking about harm reduction, we are not attempting to like ignore or minimize any of the real harms that come from using drugs, right? We're just acknowledging like there is a lot of layers here. There's a lot of factors at play. And instead of ignoring them and pretend they don't exist, it's very important to face them head on and address them as we see them. Ultimately, it ends up saving lives, right? When we give people access to harm reduction and services, instead of pretending that, oh, drug use is bad, therefore you should stop using drugs and bad things will stop happening to you. Life is much more complex than that. So when you're thinking about harm reduction and harm reduction services, there are pretty much harm reduction services all around us that we wouldn't really think about as harm reduction services. Some of them are popular, like a lot of people have heard of syringe exchanges. Syringe exchanges are places that you can go and exchange used syringes for sterile ones. And with that, it lowers the potential risk for the spread of diseases. It encourages people to not share their syringes. All pathways to recovery is a big one. Letting people know that they have options, and it's not just like you're either using drugs or you're not using drugs, right? There's different types of way that people can introduce healthier behaviors into their lives, right? It's not an all or nothing thing. There's a lot of smaller micro behaviors that can help people make more positive changes that should really be acknowledged. So we'll see things like moderation management, where people don't become abstinent. They're just kind of identifying the problems with their substance use and reevaluating if they should make any changes. Like, what can I do to make my relationships with substances a little more less harmful and maybe make it a little better, right? So there's a lot of different types of pathways to recovery, and within harm reduction, all of them are welcome because we're talking about autonomy and letting people decide for themselves what's the best pathway that might work for you. Might not be the best pathway that works for someone else. People are very complex, so there's a lot of different options that, you know, we could use that work for us. It took me a long time to figure out that, you know, abstinence only wasn't going to work for me. It took me a few failed attempts of, you know, trying to be in recovery and then kind of falling back into active drug use. And it took me a while to figure out like what I needed. What I needed was therapy. I had an undiagnosed mental health condition. And then on top of that, like I needed to be on some kind of MAT. And now that I'm at 6 years, this is the longest stint that I've had in recovery, which is really nice. But it's like, that's what I needed. I needed, you know, a therapist in combination with a different type of support group and a different type of medication. So with all of us being unique people, the options that we need for recovery and to live a happy, successful, healthy life are also very unique. Naloxone is definitely a harm reduction service. You can also get naloxone at different pharmacies and health departments as well. Sometimes you can get a prescription from a doctor, take it to a pharmacy, and they'll prescribe you the naloxone. And there's a few different harm reduction organizations that do this. And even more are popping up all the time in Ohio. Safer drug use is pretty important harm reduction service. What this is saying is that it's an acknowledgement that our drug supply is very harmful, right? We can't predict what's going to be in our drugs. We cannot measure a dose that's in our drugs. We really don't even know what's in it. Every day, the landscape of drugs are changing. And when we're cracking down on certain drugs, like in the early 2000s, there was a really heavy crackdown of prescription pills, which succeeded. But when those went away, there were other drugs to take the place of what was being taken away. So when we lose things, something always comes in to replace it. So even today, we're seeing a shift of fentanyl is being cracked down on, but now we're seeing other drugs work their way into our drug supply, which is xylazine. I can add this into the follow-up notes so y'all can read more about it, but it's basically a very strong sedative that is not meant for human consumption. And it's causing a lot of harm, and people are not anticipating or expecting to get this. And even mixing it with a very strong opiate is even more dangerous. People are getting wounded in a different way, and it's just pretty scary. So when we're talking about safer drug use, it's really a way to empower people to know what they're taking, to know the dose that they're taking, and to opt out if they wanted to opt out. There's a harm reduction organization in Canada that actually provides drug testing services. And I want to say it was last year, they did a big event where they were testing people's opiates, like their heroin and their methamphetamine, and they could actually measure the dose out. So when people were taking their drug of choice, they knew what they were getting. They knew how strong it was because they knew the milligrams, and they were able to make an informed decision, right? So we'll see a lot of things, a lot of content coming out around safer drug use. Peer support is definitely a harm reduction service. A peer is someone with lived experience, like a shared lived experience. We could be talking about a peer that also actively uses drugs, or a peer that is in long-term recovery, a peer that has like a shared mental health diagnosis or a disability of some kind. A peer is just someone that shares an experience, and really you're able to form like a relationship and build trust with each other, so you guys can go forward sharing resources and supporting each other. Housing first and basic needs is a big harm reduction service. It's really hard for anyone to focus on talking about recovery or quitting drugs or moderating their drug use when their basic needs are not being met. So a lot of times you'll see people, I'll give an example. I work with a lot of people that are unsheltered, that are also actively using drugs. And it's really hard for them to even consider a time where they're able to start thinking about going to a peer support meeting, a recovery meeting, or talking about recovery, because it's like they have nowhere to sleep, they have nowhere to shower, they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. A lot of people don't have transportation. So it's like when we are not fighting to survive on the street, trying to meet our basic needs, we're able to like take a pause and look at other things in our life. So once we meet people's basic needs, it's a lot easier to go forward with recovery supports, working, etc. Supervised consumption sites are a pretty controversial one. Supervised consumption sites are places where people can go to actively use drugs under the care of a doctor, a nurse, any type of medical staff. And if something were to happen, like if someone happened to overdose in these facilities, there's going to be a doctor right there to monitor them, to Narcan them, to make sure that they're okay coming out of an overdose, and assist them with anything else that they might need. They exist in Europe, Australia, there's one in Canada, and there's also one in New York now that just popped up within the last year. And they've been serving people, and no one has ever died in any safe consumption sites that exist. It's absolutely amazing. And it's pretty cool that when people go to these safe consumption sites, it's not just for overdose prevention, but people can also go to these spaces to see a doctor about basic healthcare needs. They can get connected to a peer supporter, someone with lived experience. And if they really wanted to not use drugs at all, and they, walk in one day and they're like, hey, I actually don't want to use drugs today, I want to go detox and maybe go to residential care, they're taken to the second floor. The one in Canada has a second floor where people can actively go and detox. So like everything's super connected and everything is all in one place, which is absolutely amazing, because when people make the decision, like I want to go to detox, that could change. That could change in 10 minutes. That could change in another hour. So reducing the amount of, the amount of other hands that are like acting as middlemen, just directly connecting the person to what they need saves so much time, right? By giving people exactly what they need when they need it. And of course, like I can drop some information in the follow-ups to this too, so y'all can read more about them. They're absolutely amazing. Highly recommend to read about them. And this is what it looks like as a visual representation of what it looks like to move someone to a safer practice. Bethany, I wanted to check really quick. Is everyone good? Was there any comments or questions?
Yeah, I wanted to share a couple of questions that we had in the chat. Thank you for everyone who's engaging in there. Some people sharing some great information about xylazine, and we'll definitely share information about that going forward. So I had two good questions that I wanted to bring up to you to give you a chance to respond. So someone asked, is the goal of harm reduction to eventually be abstinent?
That's a very good question, and I actually get that one a lot. But no, the goal is not to choose what type of recovery for anybody. So the goal of harm reduction is only to reduce harm, and that's it. So if someone is, actively using drugs and they're using shared syringes, a harm reduction method would be to introduce them to a syringe exchange and get them connected to a supply of sterile syringes. But really, the goal of harm reduction is to just give people information and education and allowing them to make an informed decision and letting them choose for themselves what option, what recovery pathway they want to take, whatever that might look like. And sometimes it can be abstinence if that's what they want, but it's not like making that decision for them. I hope that was good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's all about meeting people where they're at. And so then the other question that I had from someone was asking if you're still on MAT and do you receive negative comments that you're trading one drug for another? They said they're a big MAT supporter, but they want to know about like your experience with that.
Yeah, thank you. That's really nice. Thank you for asking. So yeah, I've been on Suboxone for the last 5 years out of my 6 in recovery so far. And it's like I go once a month, I see my doctor, do my visit. It's great. I meet a lot of good people that way. And unfortunately, yes, I get a lot of negative comments. It's gotten better over the years because when people find out like, oh, you actually have like this long of a time in recovery, it's like it's less likely that they're going to try to stigmatize me, essentially. But in the beginning, it was a lot more rough because I was still trying to do like recovery support meetings, like AA meetings and NA meetings. Yeah, it was hard. Like I wasn't openly sharing about it for a few years. So like there was a very long time where I was not okay with telling people openly that I was on MAT because of just the stigma the things that I hear other people say when they don't know that I'm on MAT and they feel comfortable enough to talk, badly about MAT. So that kind of changed my mind a little bit. But now I'm in a space where it's like I'm actively working against stigma and I'm trying to educate. So that changed my mind about like me being open with it. Like if that's what it takes, I'm going to use myself as an example and try to make the world a little bit of a better place. So I'm a huge advocate for MAT now.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, we have got some really great thoughts shared in the chat. People sharing that they used to be against the harm reduction sites or the safe consumption sites, but now understanding that these keep people safe, all about meeting people where they're at, and just the person who asked the question about the abstinence, that gave them a better understanding. So yeah, they shared that in the chat. So thank you everyone for your thoughts. And yeah, we'll continue to share your questions and we'll pause for those throughout.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure if I said this earlier or not too, but I love getting questions like that. And I'm absolutely an open book. I love being able to talk about stuff like this. So a lot of times I hear like, oh, this is a silly question, or maybe I shouldn't ask it, but I love getting questions like that. Nothing is silly, and this is all about learning, and that's the whole reason why we're here. So feel free to ask away too. Okay, moving on to the visual. This is a really like simplified version of the relationships that people can have with substance use, different types of substances even. But this is like a good representation of what it looks like. So on the left, you have someone that's in chaotic use. And I like to use myself as an example. I was definitely in the red zone when I was actively using drugs. I was reusing syringes, sharing them with other people. I was not testing my drugs to find out what was in them. So it's like, I really had no idea what I was using. Of course, there were things that I thought that I knew, but I really didn't. I was using alone. I didn't always have a support person with me. So like, it would be cool if I had my friends around and we used together, but if I didn't, then I didn't, which was really, really risky. I had no medical care or Narcan, no support. And I was seeing like a lot of negative consequences come from that. Just the fact of not seeing a doctor, not being willing to go to talk to anybody like a therapist. I lost my license for a while and didn't have transportation. That made everything a little more difficult. But when we introduce harm reduction to someone who is in chaotic use in the red zone, we're moving them out of the red and into the yellow and towards the green, the recovery-based mindset. We want to be able to give people their power back. We want people to feel like they are informed and like they can take care of themselves. So we want to be able to give people Narcan. We want them to know what to do with it. Testing their drugs with fentanyl test strips to know what they're using. And we really just want them to be open to receiving new information and open to trying new things, because that's what starts the ripple effect. When you're kind and you're compassionate and you're giving someone options and not judging them for using drugs in the first place, you're opening up a whole new world for them. And that's where like reducing harm comes in and peer support comes into play, because you're building a relationship with that person. And when you build a relationship with someone, they're more likely to hear what you have to say and feel safe to tell you things, to be honest with you about what they're feeling like. So like, that's why I say like the goal isn't to just get them to not use drugs. It's more like giving them their power back to make those decisions for themselves and support them along the way. If I would have had someone to teach me about like the effectiveness of MAT when I was actively using, like that could have changed my life. But because it was so stigmatized back then, and it still is today, but just simply because of the fact that I was actively using and I didn't want to be even more stigmatized, I was less willing to even try any options at all, because I didn't want to put myself into even more harm's way. So it was easier for me to just keep doing what I was doing and pretend everybody else didn't exist. We want people to be in a space where they can be honest. That way they can really identify and look at like, hey, is my drug use causing me more harm? Like, is it problematic? Am I seeing a lot of negative consequences come from my use? And what can I do to change that? So this is what we want. Take them out of harm's way and into a recovery mindset where they're open and sharing information with their peers as well. Okay, the layers of stigma. This one is pretty deep, and I broke down the different layers and types of stigma so we can kind of get into understanding them all and how they intersect and form our experience and can either help us or harm us. So stigma, public stigma, is when the public has identified with the negative attitudes and beliefs about people who use drugs. And it can really affect like people's mental health, physical health, lower their self-esteem. And it can make people feel like that people who use drugs are dangerous and that they can't be trusted. Basically just reaffirming the stereotypes about people who use drugs. And I like to give the example of, if you can imagine like any TV show or movie that you've watched that has a person who's actively using drugs in it. They're normally stereotyped. There's someone who is portrayed as someone who cannot be trusted, that they're probably going to be dishonest, They might even steal from you or be stealing from other characters in the TV show. And for folks that don't have lived experience with someone who is in recovery or using drugs, that's what they're going to base their opinion of us off of. It's the only time that they've ever seen anything like anything close to resembling someone who uses drugs. They're going to take that and they're going to apply it to their very real life where they know people who actually do use drugs or are in recovery and cause very real harm. It results in a lot of discrimination, a lot of stereotyping, prejudices, creating an even more of a hostile environment for us to exist, and can really just push us further into isolation where people are like afraid of us and we're afraid of being outed to them. Pretty sinister stuff. Association, stigma through association is stigma that's linked to a person that has a substance use disorder or someone that's using drugs, and even mental health as well. This could be like a family member. When I was actively using and I got put in jail, I know my father got a lot of negative phone calls from the people that knew, like our direct network, right? So my dad got a lot of bad phone calls about me that I was using drugs and he was a bad parent because I was in jail for using drugs. And he got stigmatized because of me. So the stigma that I was facing was extended to him because of his proximity to me. And we don't want that. So being aware of it allows us to make a change, right? And actually do something about it. And this also, like I said, can apply to people with mental health diagnosis as well. Medical stigma is stigma about substance use disorder and people who use drugs. Really can also include inaccurate beliefs, unfounded thoughts like they're dangerous, people who use drugs are not capable of managing their own treatment, or they're at fault for their condition, ultimately. It results in a lot of people not even wanting to seek medical care. When I was 2 years into recovery, I was looking to have my hepatitis C treatment. Like, I wanted to get rid of my hepatitis C because it was continuously getting worse. Because I'm originally from Portage County, I didn't have access to a syringe exchange. When I ended up finding out I had hepatitis, I didn't realize how bad that was and like what it was going to mean for me in the future. So when I finally got into recovery, like 2 years later, when I settled down, I went looking for a doctor, and I was told no. I was denied 5 different times because, for one, they wanted to have at least another year of drug testing on the record because they didn't believe that I was actually in recovery. They said, why would we treat you for this if you're just going to reinfect yourself anyway? So we need to have at least a year documented of drug screens for you. Meanwhile, I'm getting worse. Like, the more scans that I've done, I can see it like progressing as time goes on. And finally, I felt like giving up, but luckily I had a good support system around me that encouraged me to keep going. And, on the 6th try, that's when I finally got it. Like, I finally found a doctor that was willing to work with me and treat me. They believed me when I told them I'm in recovery, and they didn't make me go through like the just extreme amount of drug testing to be able to prove that I was worthy of getting treatment. They, just treated me and that was it. But a lot of that is based off of stigma. Like, they thought I was going to just reinfect myself if they treated me, that I wasn't worth treating because I did it to myself. And, all the while it's getting worse because cirrhosis, if you leave it for too long, it turns into, or hepatitis, it turns into cirrhosis, which can turn into liver failure. So it's like, if I would have been further along and needed a transplant or something, they would have done that, but they wouldn't treat it before it got to that point. There's definitely a lot of stigma in the medical field And there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. And it all starts with us being aware of it, right? It can definitely lead people to not want to seek medical care at all. So a lot of times you'll see people or know people that are actively using that just don't want to go to the dentist. They don't want to go see a doctor. Like, why would we want to do this when that's putting us in harm's way all over again? For some people, it's just easier to ignore it and just pretend it's not happening. But then like our health conditions end up getting worse over time, right? Institutional stigma is more systemic, like politics, bigger government agencies, policies, even private organizations that either intentionally or unintentionally limit opportunities for people who use drugs or are in recovery or have mental illness. And really it negatively affects the programs that are intended to help us manage our substance use disorders or our drug use or our mental health. We see this translate to a lot of times we're punished for our substance use. And even when we're in recovery, we're still being punished. A lot of us have felonies and misdemeanors on our record. So when we go into recovery, it's like we're already starting, 10 feet behind. We have to look harder for a job that'll accept people with felonies or a record. And it makes things really difficult for us to deal with. And that can even apply to housing, getting a credit card, getting a vehicle, needing a co-signer. And then internalized stigma is when we take all of these different layers and we start to believe that about ourselves. Like we flip that on ourselves and we start to believe that we are bad people, that we do deserve the mistreatment that we are getting, and we don't deserve to be treated kindly or compassionately by our peers and our family because we've equated our experience to like, oh, I'm using drugs, so that means I'm bad, or I did this to myself, so of course I deserve to be treated bad, and I don't deserve to get health care, and I don't deserve to have nice things. It's really hard to pull yourself out of that, especially if you're not aware of it and you're not considering all the factors at play with this. There's still a lot of internalized stigma that I have to fight with myself. Like I shared earlier, being on MAT, it took me years to be able to openly talk about that because I had started believing the stigmatizing beliefs that I was hearing around me. Overall, stigma just results in poor health outcomes across the board, poor treatment, and it all keeps us separated and divided and isolated. And it's a pretty big thing to tackle. So it's important to be aware of it so we can work on it together. I wanted to ask Bethany, did anyone have any comments that they wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so we had one specific question that asked about your thoughts on the Sublocade shot, but I just wanted to give kind of a disclaimer because we aren't medical professionals and giving opinions on a specific medication. Everybody has, as we said, their own recovery journey and they work with their own provider to determine what's best for them. But I wanted to open it up if you wanted to share anything on that. But again, yeah, just say that there's a lot of different MAT options and we just like that there's options and we think there should be more options. But if you want to add anything to that.
I definitely agree. I think any type of MAT options are amazing. And that's the whole concept of empowering people, to make decisions for themselves and explore their options, right? And we can't explore options if we don't have any. So the more that exists, the better, whether it's methadone, Suboxone, Vivitrol shot, Sublocade, whatever it might look like. There's so many different things out there. And I'm glad that, we exist in a world where they do exist, but those also come with their own barriers as well because of stigma.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's some other comments in this. Someone just left a big comment, so I'll read yours, Robert, in a second. But other comments about like experience with needing, the similar, like at least 6 months of sobriety to have the treatment, and people asking where to get Narcan, which we'll go over here shortly. But yeah, just some really good comments in the chat. So please keep those up and we'll continue forward. And the recent comments we'll address here in a second. So go ahead, Ashley.
Nice, thank you. Okay, so now that we've covered the different types of layers of stigma, I'm going to go into language and types of stigmatizing language and things that we can replace them with. So, like I said earlier, stigma, it's basically stereotyping someone, right? Like chalking a person up to a label, an identity, a judgment. And that can either harm somebody, or isolate them further than what they already are. So a way that we can take some of our power back and reduce potential harms in this way is by using person-first language. Today, there is a lot of language that, like, sure, it doesn't sound like it would be harmful, but it has changed over the years. Like on the left, you'll see some examples, drug addict, junkie, and druggie, even addict. Those words have been used in such a negative context for, the last however many years, is that now when they're used, they're actually stereotyping a person. Like, think about the caricature of someone who uses drugs that exist in television or in movies. That's what those labels are doing, and we don't want to assign that label to anybody. Of course, it's very important to note that when we, as people in recovery or people with lived experience, are in our safe spaces, like our recovery meetings, our peer support meetings, whatever that is, we're allowed to self-identify however we want to identify. But what's not okay is to put that label onto someone else and make the assumption that they're going to identify with whatever words we choose for them. So it's always important to make that distinction. And, person-first language is a way to reduce any potential harm or like branding or labeling of somebody. So instead of saying like addict, druggie, say like exactly what it is, which is someone who uses drugs, person who uses drugs, or someone with substance use disorder, if they have a diagnosis of substance use disorder, because not everyone who, takes drugs is going to have a diagnosis of SUD, substance use disorder. So that's like a safe way to go about it. Just they're a person who uses drugs. Same thing for sober/clean. And we'll talk about this for drug testing as well, referring to any person or drug screen as clean or dirty. It's inappropriate. It's also harmful. And like just chalking it up to being either clean or dirty isn't really helpful. So try to use language that's either like negative results or positive results, or I'm someone in recovery, instead of saying they're clean, because that's implying they're not clean if they're using. And this is a lot of there's a lot more out there that exist for background on language. So I would love to just throw it out there and make suggestions. Like if you want more information on different types of language, it definitely is out there. Dictionary.com actually removed the word addict out of their language, and they replaced it with person who uses drugs and substance use, like just saying substance use or substance use disorder, because it's becoming more prevalent that these words have been taken and turned into a stereotype that are then used to harm people. So this is a way that we can reduce some of that harm. And of course, changing our language takes practice and it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's not saying that people who use these words are inherently harmful. It's just saying like we should probably be mindful and practice using person first language. So we're identifying someone or talking about someone as the person they are first, instead of defining them as their diagnosis or something they do, right? And this can also apply to other substance uses or mental health diagnosis as well. Like we don't refer to anybody else as their diagnosis. We refer to them as a whole individual and a whole person. I wanted to also launch the second poll before we got into a discussion, and that's a question about stigma. So after listening and thinking about stigma and types of stigma, we wanted to ask everyone in here, have you experienced stigma in any way? So Barb, if you're able to launch the second poll, number 2, and I'll give it a
Yes, I'm
minute.
trying. It's still
Okay.
showing that it's got poll 1 up and it won't go away. Let's see.
Oh.
Oh, there, here we go. Got it. Here we go.
Love Zoom for that. Love it.
Oh, I think that's
Oh.
what brings you here today,
That's
which
the
we
wrong one.
accidentally skipped that one. So we'll skip that one.
Yeah,
And
maybe it's
Barbara, if
3.
there's, yeah.
Well, we can let everybody answer it real quick. They're fast answerers. So we'll give everybody about 20, 30 seconds because it's good to see real quick. And then you want number 3 then?
Yes. Yeah, that'll be good.
All right, I'm going to count to 3 and then I'm going to stop this one. And real quick, you can look because you can just kind of see.
Nice.
I think it's good information. All
I
right, I'm
agree.
going to stop sharing and I'm going to go to poll number 3.
There we go. Perfect.
There you go.
Thank you. And normally, like when we do our monthly trainings, we'll have like a discussion time, but I know that like in this format, people aren't able to unmute. But for anybody listening, if there is something you wanted to share or like write in the comments or message Bethany to read, definitely feel free to share. If you have any experience with stigma that you want to talk about or witnessing stigma, or even if you have like helpful advice for people that are wanting to make changes, like if something worked for you, let us know.
All right, I'm going to close this one. It looks like we've stopped getting some responses. So I'm going to go ahead and end this one and I will share the results.
That's a lot of people in here who have also witnessed and seen it and experienced it. Thank you all for answering those questions. It's really important for us to be aware of, not only like if we experienced it, but also if we're causing stigma too, right? I will throw out there something that really helped me make the changes in my language, because I used to use all those words that we just seen on the screen. It's really helpful to have like a friend or a coworker, a teammate, a peer, whoever it might be, someone that you trust, someone that you spend a lot of time with, and someone that can just generally like make you aware if you're using stigmatizing language or saying something that's stigmatizing. Someone to just point out to you like, hey, you actually said something stigmatizing, or you can do the same for them, like vice versa. It's not something that is like gonna change in the snap of a finger, but it is something that needs to be practiced. I'm still working on it to this day. Like I catch myself slipping up at times. It's definitely not easy, but with practice, it can be done. I am Bethany, did you want to share anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to share just a couple of experiences people had. A lot of or a few people shared about like racially based stigma, which is a huge one in our world, as well as like the intersections, like we've talked about intersectionality of someone who's biracial and also has dealt with addiction and a mental health diagnosis, like that is just so compounding of all those different layers of stigma. So thank you so much, everyone who's sharing. Someone else just shared that they have a brother who's been incarcerated many times due to substance use, and stigma has been done like through association. Yeah. That thank you so much, Holly, for sharing that. Yeah, it really, like, those different layers are so real when it comes to this. Someone shared they're also in a similar situation. Yeah, some people just sharing about their experiences with other individuals in their life. Sarah said, in graduate school, one of my professors referenced a movie to illustrate that he understood my diagnosis. I didn't have the heart to correct his misunderstanding. I wish I would have said something. Yeah,
Oof.
sometimes, a lot of times, the stigmatizing, like, stereotypes that are portrayed in movies and media definitely don't represent the accurate spectrum of people's lived experiences. And that public stigma definitely is perpetuating. There's some ways where it is improving sometimes in the media, but it still has a long way to go.
Absolutely agree. Thank you. Thank you for that, Bethany. Thank you guys. Thank you all for sharing. It's very important that we be able to like just talk and share information. Like that's how we work together to make the changes that we want to see. So everyone feels safe and everyone gets exactly what they need. I'm going to go into Narcan and overdose training, like responding to an overdose. Narcan is, or you'll sometimes hear it as Naloxone, but what Narcan is, it's the brand name. So you'll hear those be used interchangeably sometimes, but in general, it's the antidote to an overdose for an opiate overdose. It's not addictive. It's safe for people to use. No matter what drugs they used, it's not going to have an effect if it's, any other substance, but it will work on the opiates if the person is overdosing. It basically doesn't have like any response if someone uses it when they didn't need to. What it does is it kicks the opiates off the receptors in your body so that there is like a flow of breathing again, because when someone overdoses, they have too much of something in their system, like they have too much opiates in their system and it overwhelms their body, right? So when naloxone is introduced, it just pushes it off out of their body, and then they can start breathing like back to normal again. And it takes time to wake up, but it's the antidote. And sometimes you need more than one spray. There's 2 sprays. They look like this in one box. And it's totally normal, especially with today's drug supply. We don't know the dose. We don't know how strong it's going to be. So it's normal to need more than one. And like I said, an overdose is when you have an overwhelming amount of a substance in your body and it kind of takes over your system. It slows your breathing down, almost like impossible to see if someone's still breathing or not. And we're going to talk about signs and what that looks like physically. So when someone's experiencing an overdose, they're not going to be responsive at all. They're not going to respond to any like verbal cues or physical cues because they're unconscious. Their body, their breathing and respiratory system has slowed down to the point that there's nothing going on. Like they're not going to be able to hear or respond to you. So if you know the person and you say their name or you tap them, you even raise your voice, there's not going to be any response there because they're overdosing. Their breathing will be shallow. It'll be hard to tell if they have a pulse or if they're breathing at all. Sometimes people would make like a choking or a gurgling noise because that's their respiratory system struggling to breathe, to do its job, to do what it needs to do. But it's not getting the proper amount of oxygen, so it is not functioning the way it should. You'll also see skin color changes, and this goes for all different types of skin tones as well. When there's a lack of oxygen, the colors, tones change. It could be like a purplish, bluish, ashen color. It'll look washed out and paler. And you could also look for their fingertips as well, like underneath their fingernails, will also be changing colors. So that, in combination with the fact that they're unresponsive, there's very, very slow, shallow breathing or that choking, gurgling noise. It doesn't, I know that some people have said they've mistaken it for a snore, like the way that it sounds, but it's different. You can tell that they're struggling to breathe. Their system is struggling to function. So if you go through all of those steps and you don't get a response, then it's time to move forward and use the Narcan spray. You don't have to assemble it. There's nothing that's needed to be done there. It comes in a box. There's 2 sprays in 1 box. So you peel it out just like the picture on the screen, peel it out, you place it into their nose, and then you push the plunger in. You don't need to prime it or like get it ready to do anything. Like all you have to do is spray it. It's really, really easy. It's all ready to go. You don't want to push the plunger, like priming it, because it will just waste the spray. I would say that if you are living with someone who might be in recovery or might be using drugs, I would definitely keep naloxone on you, or maybe even more than that, because there's different substances out there that are stronger than others. So you don't know how much nasal spray you might need. I always keep some in my house, in my parents' house, my aunts and uncles' houses, and it's just like a precautionary thing. Even if people are in recovery, it's important to have Narcan. So when you're responding to an overdose, and you have to like turn away, grab your cell phone to call 911, you don't want to leave the person just completely alone, unattended, if you don't have to, but there are things you can do to make it a little bit safer for them. If you're alone, before you grab your phone, you want to put them into what's called the recovery position. That's when you flip them onto their side, just like in the picture shows. You're kind of tucking their leg and arm up in a way where they're not rolling over on their back, and they're not going to like flop over on their stomach. Because if they do start waking up and their system is starting to function again, they could end up vomiting and they could end up choking. And if they're on their back, they're not going to be able to roll themselves back over. So if you can, if you have other people in your like vicinity that can either monitor the person for you so you can make the call, or you grab your phone, put it on speaker, set it down so you can continue to monitor the person. But whatever you do, you don't want to leave the person completely alone or on their back. So as a recap and review, this is what the steps look like. Stimulate in some way, verbally, physically, give them a little shake, raise your voice, try to do what you can to get their attention. Because if they're just really intoxicated, they'll be able to hear you and respond. But if there is no response, you can do also what's called a sternum rub, where you take your knuckles and you push your knuckles in between their chest, like their breastbone. It's really painful. So if they're awake at all, they will feel that because it's very uncomfortable. You can even tell them that you're going to Narcan them as well. I've had to do that a few times. If you are ever confused and you're wondering, like, I wonder if this person is like overdosing or if they're intoxicated, if you tell them that you're going to Narcan them and they're awake, they will definitely ask you to not Narcan them, because nobody wants to be Narcaned unnecessarily. So going forward, if you go through all that and there's still no response, grab the Narcan, take it out of the box, peel it open, press it into their nose and push the plunger, put them in the recovery position before walking away from them. You don't want to leave them unattended for any amount of time. You don't know what could happen. Anything could happen in, a few seconds, a minute. So flip them onto their side before walking away, grab your phone, call 911, and just tell them exactly what you're seeing. Just tell them, I'm with someone who is not responsive. That's really all the information you need to give them. You don't need to say anything too extra or too much about like drugs or make guesses. Just say exactly what you see is happening, and they'll send paramedics, and then you can take it from there, or they will take it from there in figuring out what to do next. You can do also rescue breathing. This is becoming more prevalent as our drug supply changes to include things like xylazine and other sedatives. So naloxone does not work on sedatives. So you can technically, sure, still use it on the person, of course, because it works on the opiates. But with sedatives, the person is going to need oxygen. It's like going to put them into a deeper sleep. So even if they aren't overdosing, it'll still look like they're sleeping. So you want that person to have oxygen. Even if there's no sedatives, you want the person to have oxygen. So if you can, and you're comfortable with it, do rescue breathing. After 2 minutes goes by and the person is still unresponsive, administer another dose. Then continue rescue breathing and start again. Give another dose in 2 minutes. Do rescue breathing until the paramedics arrive or until they wake up. Did anybody have questions about any of this in the chat? I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, so we have got a couple comments and questions. So we've got people sharing about, that they keep Narcan on them. I also want to just like re-highlight, someone brought this up in a private message as well, like naloxone, like Narcan, like we said, is the name brand. Naloxone, all naloxone is good naloxone, even if it's generic or injectable. We train on the nasal spray kind, but there are other forms like Ashley had pictured on the initial naloxone slide. And also just to note, if you are keeping your Narcan in your car and it's really cold or really hot out, it might not work. It might reduce the potency, and also if it's frozen, it doesn't work. So be careful about keeping it in your car. We recommend taking the individual doses out, keeping it in a purse or coat pocket that comes in and out of the car. And then we've got a couple of other questions, so I'll refer to you for these. So someone asked, is there such a thing as too much naloxone during an overdose? And are there any side effects to using too much? What is the limit in case where someone is still not responsive after 1 to 2 sprays? Is that typically not enough in most cases? So asking about, is there, can you use more if needed? And is there a consequence of using too much? So go ahead and answer that.
I would say there's no actual like technical consequences that are going to be harmful to the person. Like there is a way like to cause harm to them. Like if you're slamming them with Narcan every 15 seconds, like that's gonna put them into what's called a precipitated withdrawal, which is pretty painful. So that's why they say to do the spray, do the Narcan spray, wait 2 minutes. Some people even wait 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, and give them another spray. So like you're giving it time to work its way through the person's system before, hitting them with another one. But it's not harmful in the sense like toxic. Like there have been people who have needed more than 5 doses. The last time I overdosed, I needed 6 doses. It's just different depending on the person and what they took. But that's why it's so important to do also rescue breathing as well.
Yes, yeah, that's super important. And then someone else asked, I was taught that even after Narcan, a person needs medical attention because they can overdose again later when the Narcan wears off. Is that true?
It's rare, but it can happen after 90 minutes. It wears off, and This is something too I planned on talking about on the next slide where we talk about post-overdose aftercare. But it is really important to stay with the person after they've been Narcaned, if they will let you, because we don't know what other kind of underlying medical conditions that overdose could trigger. It's a traumatic experience and it's hard on your body. So if there is any option to seek medical care afterwards, I would encourage that for sure. But of course, there's context in which some people cannot afford to be anywhere near like law enforcement, but it is important.
Yes, it is. And I'm trying to get to all the questions. We've got a lot in the chat. And some comments about kind of the difference between the Narcan like potency and forms and stuff. We can definitely send out some more information on like Narcan expiration because it does vary depending on the form of naloxone and naloxone disposal. Like it's hard to speak for across the different brands and options that are out there now. So we can talk a little bit more about that. Expired naloxone, we have heard that it still can work at times, but of course that's not like the FDA message and approval. So it's always good to have non-expired on you. And there are groups that will take the expired, but we can send out more information about that after this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's all different kinds of studies that exist on the expiration of Narcan and the potency of Narcan that's been through the heat and freeze, like thaw cycle as well, which is pretty interesting. We can send those out. So when we're talking about post-overdose aftercare, so after you've responded to an overdose, it's a really traumatic experience and it's a very confusing and disorienting thing to go through. Like people are really confused when they wake up from being Narcaned. It's hard to tell, like you don't know that you've been Narcaned because you were unconscious. So by the time the person wakes up from overdosing, they need to be told that they overdosed. I like to use I statements and encourage you to do I statements as well. That, reduces any potential embarrassment, guilt, or blame. It's already hard to go through and it's embarrassing on top of that when you wake up and you have people standing over you. So it's an embarrassing thing, but if you respond compassionately and kindly and use I statements, that can make it a little less, embarrassing. So when you're talking to them, say things like, hey, I found you overdosing and I was worried and I gave you Narcan and I called 911. Like just say exactly what happened and be kind, use a gentle voice. I was worried when you overdosed, so I called for help and I gave you Narcan, things like that, that can reduce any shame or guilt, any of those feelings. Stay with them while they recover, of course. Different people are going to have different responses to this, of course, but if you tell them like, hey, I just want to make sure that you're okay. We don't know what could happen throughout this process, like what underlying medical conditions are going to be triggered by this. Also in 90 minutes, like there is a potential that it could wear off, like Narcan has its limits. It only stays in your system for so long. And you want to make sure that person continues to be up and awake and moving and getting the care that they need. So if there's any way that, you can let them know that you would like to stay with them while they recover, that would be great. And if there's other people around, don't hesitate to like tap someone else in. This is traumatic for all parties involved, whether or not like you're the one giving the Narcan or receiving the Narcan. It's traumatic. It's a lot to go through. So, be mindful about how you feel in that moment. And there's no right or wrong ways to feel, of course. Debrief with someone afterwards as well. Like talk to someone that you trust, a friend, a family member, a therapist, a peer, whoever it might be. Just like get it out, process what happened, you know, talk about it, let it go. Very traumatic stuff that we're talking about here. So it's important to be mindful about how you feel. Additional resources, harm reduction type resources. These links are all active. So I'll send this out after, like in the follow-up email. So when you see this slide, you'll be able to click on it and all the links will take you directly to the website. Movies, podcasts, and books that I highly recommend that are all focused around harm reduction in some way. Absolutely amazing stuff here. And this list is always growing too. So if there's something that you think should be on this list, I can definitely add it and share it with everybody as well. There's a lot of good stuff on here. So and I wanted to give some people space to talk. Was there anything that you wanted to share or any private messages, Bethany, that you wanted to talk about?
Not as of right now. I am just gonna send some final things. I know people asked about where to get Naloxone, all of these things. So we're gonna show a slide on this in a second, but I know that people might have to head out early, so I just want to add this in. We'll send these in the follow-up as well. But yeah, feel free to send any final comments to me as we go through these final slides.
Yes, definitely take our information, like our contact information. Like I said, we're an open book. We're open to talking about anything that you need, like consulting with or have questions about. These are some quick and easy ways that you can incorporate harm reduction into your own life, especially if you're new to harm reduction or looking for more things to do. Language is a good one. It's an ongoing journey and an ongoing process. Like it takes time. I know that there was a moment where I thought I knew everything about everything, and then it's like, oh, I keep learning new things. There's always something else that I'm learning about. It's always something is changing, and language to be mindful of, and methods of harm reduction that are existing. It's just always something. So like jump into some volunteer work if you're close enough. If you got a harm reduction organization near you, like in your community, volunteer with them. If you're on social media like Facebook or Instagram, jump into some harm reduction focused Facebook groups or harm reduction hashtags so you can see what else is going on, like happening in your community or even across the country. Carrying Narcan and fentanyl testing strips. Being in Ohio, you can get Narcan for free from us. You can also become a Narcan distributor as well. So you can get up to 5 kits from our mail order form. We send it anywhere in the state. But again, if you want to be a Narcan distributor, we can do that for you as well. If that's something you're interested in, take you through the training and make sure that you are educated in all the resources that we have to offer you. And the biggest one is like being open to receiving new information. Like I said, keep on the lookout for other webinars that exist, other groups that are putting on webinars. There's just so much happening in this space, and it's constantly growing and evolving. So there's always something that can be done. And I would say follow us on Facebook if you want to stay like up to date on what we're doing and our like webinar opportunities. And yeah, we have a lot going on. We do a lot of work in Cuyahoga County, the Cleveland area. So if you wanted to volunteer, you could do that. We have a Facebook page where we post all of our events at, both in person and virtual. Sign up for our trainings, join some Facebook groups, share this information with your network. You can share any of this information like with your own people. So like make sure your job, your work has Narcan. Make sure that your teammates are trained on how to use it, and they also know what to do, and they also know where to get it. Check in with your family members. Make sure that they're carrying Narcan when they go into public spaces. Overdoses don't happen in specific locations or times. Overdoses can happen anywhere. at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the library, like literally anywhere, like, because regular people use drugs. So anytime we go out into the community, like that's a potential opportunity that we could need to have it on us. So you can even get a little bag. I have a little like Naloxone bag that I carry my Narcan in. But it's just really important. Keep it on you and continue wanting to learn. We have one more poll. Barb, is it possible to launch that last poll?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so we wanted to know, what are your next steps after this training? Like, what are the things that you plan on doing after this? And feel free to, like, if none of your options that you like feel like you're going to do after this are in this multiple choice, type it in the chat. Or if it's going to be all of them, also do that. You can also type that in the chat too.
Okay, we'll give it another few seconds here. There's a few more answering, and then I'll share the results here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful that you all came today. It's definitely amazing to be able to be in this space and give this information to you all. And that's the gift, being able to give it away as well. So thank you all for being here today. Were there any final
Thank you
things?
all. Yes, please complete our follow-up survey. We'll have this sent out in the follow-up email. But this helps us know how to improve going forward and what you all got out of this. I'm sorry the unmute function isn't available, but definitely send us any additional thoughts or anything through email. We would love to hear it. And yeah, thank you all so much for your time today. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and we're getting close to the weekend. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ashley and Bethany, for being with us here today. I think it was very informative. Thank you all who participated for being so engaged and so many questions. That was absolutely wonderful. We will, as they've alluded to, we will be sending out a follow-up to everybody who attended and even all those who registered. We will aggregate all the resources Ashley and Bethany mentioned, and that email will be probably coming out Monday or Tuesday, just so you can know what to expect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, relink.org, for having us, and Barbara for helping facilitate and everything, and for all the work that you're doing to connect people to resources around the state.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you guys for what you're doing, and everybody have a wonderful day.
All right, bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.